Okay, welcome to our reInvent session on Carrier's move of JD Edwards to AWS. I'm joined today by Rick Carey from
Hi,
Carrier,
guys.
Who will kind of lead us through kind of the presentation. So, Rick.
Thank you, Jeremy. So thanks very much for sparing us some time. I know we've kind of got the dead zone after lunch, so those of you that have had lunch, please don't fall asleep. Those of you that are dying to get to lunch, don't rush out early, please. Okay? So thank you very much for joining us. As Jeremy said, I am fortunate enough to have led a multi-million-dollar project to move JD Edwards 9.2 from an on-prem situation to the AWS cloud. I'll tell you a little bit about how we did that, some of the challenges and some of the mechanics. Jeremy is absolutely the technical safety net for us on this project, has been a very, very tremendous partner. So for about the next 30, 40, 50 minutes, whatever we do, depending upon how long you let me ramble, we're going to talk about the project. So here we are, going to talk about who we are and Carrier, the corporation that I am fortunate enough to work for, how we selected AWS, what was the scope of our project, what was the AWS solution we selected and we ultimately landed on, ironing out some of the details of how that project went, and then, trying to wrap up and asking you guys if you've got questions. So, without further ado, this is me. Don't intend to stick on this slide very long. Worked with JD Edwards for a very long time. Remember it back in the Ed McVaney days when it was, 4.5, 5.4, 7.3, Y2K. But, very, very fortunate to have worked with this product for a very long time. Have worked for Carrier now for just over 7 years. Been through a series of different channels in my career, from international trade, airlines, commodity trading, etc. I got some formal training on the way in terms of Prince 2 and some Scrum Master training. This is me, LinkedIn, Rick Carey. So if anybody has any questions, you can always find me and reach out. We'll be around. Jeremy.
All right. So I'm Jeremy Shearer. I am a senior partner architect here at AWS, and I'm part of the Oracle applications team. So my role is to help partners be successful in migrating customer workloads to AWS. So I work with the partners to help them be successful. My background is JD Edwards. I've been doing JD Edwards since the mid-90s. Did some of the earliest B731 beta installations, worked with JD Edwards, taught classes at JD Edwards for a few years, and done ongoing consulting, and joined AWS here a couple of years back. So happy to be here, have this call today, this conversation today.
Thank you. A team that's not here today but has been very intrinsic to our program and our journey through this project is Larson Torbro Infotech. I promised them I'd give them a quick mention. So these are some of the team members that helped us through this. They have been a tremendously reliable, very strong, very knowledgeable resource, and I'll come back to some comments on this a little bit later. But fundamentally, between LTI, AWS, and Carrier, this has been a journey, and it's been a tremendous success compared with what it could have been. So thank you. Okay, ins and outs. Oh, sorry. Oops, that was another challenging global project that we had some trouble with. Sorry about that. So, Carrier. Formerly, we were part of United Technologies. Okay, back right in the middle of the pandemic, early 2020, between Wall Street, between Greg Hayes and everything, United Technologies broke apart into their three primary groups and set up two totally independent companies, Carrier and Otis. United Technologies merged with Raytheon to become Raytheon Technologies. So Carrier was a 100-year startup at this point. So, a little bit about Carrier, Fortune 500 company, founded in 1915. We are over $20 billion of revenue, somewhere in the region of 58 to 60,000 employees across the globe, 80 different types of brands, etc. So very, very sizable organization going through, as I say, 100-year startup as we transition to this new standalone company and wrestle with the challenges of the 20th century. These are some of the brands that Carrier own. You may recognize some of them. The one that I'm wearing here, Kidde, for, you may well have Kidde fire extinguishers, Kidde smoke alarms in your house. Very important part of the Carrier Fire and Security Products division. And then we have the Carrier HVAC division, and we have the refrigeration Carrier Transicold division. So some of those names hopefully you'll recognize. So when we stood up and we separated from UTC and became this startup, we were very fortunate to bring on board a senior vice president and CDO, Bobby George. And he has taken us through a journey where we've moved from, individual silos, independent teams, working under, project management, a waterfall type methodology, to now into center of excellence teams, with a focus on cloud first, customer support, the customer first enablement, moving on to things like robotic process automation for some of our manufacturing facilities, and AI and machine learning for growth into the future. I'm fortunate enough to head up the JD Edwards COE element of our ERP COE. As part of this, I'm kind of trying to bring JD Edwards onto AWS, bring us into this model, into this vision, and drive us forward in terms of enablement and being able to serve customers better, make things more efficient for our employees, and of course, interest shareholders. So earlier this year, I think, or last year, well, certainly back in, the 2020, I think, Bobby George, our senior vice president, made a commitment with Amazon as our primary cloud infrastructure partner. He was here at the AWS reInvent Summit, and reinforced our commitment to moving to AWS and helping to bring Carrier into the 21st century. As part of that, we made a commitment to move something like over 70% of our 4,000 servers onto AWS, 900 plus applications, nearly 1,000 applications, data warehousing and analytics. So we made a very, very strong commitment to move to AWS, and that is our strategic partner, our strategic direction, and this project was part of that. Why did we choose AWS for JD Edwards? Maybe not the most logical choice, but let's talk a little bit about how we did that. So there's a lot of cloud people out there. We all know that. When we started the project, it was a case of evaluating what's best for the application and what's best for the end customers. So we went out and we spoke to many, many, many cloud providers, and we sort of, went through some due diligence in terms of, what are we looking for? What are our measurements? How do we judge which of the providers we want to go with? So for JD Edwards, I think most everybody will think a logical step would be to go to OCI. Same product, same product owner, know the migration paths very quickly, very easily. So, so that was obviously a very, very big player in the decision-making process. We ruled out a hybrid approach early on for several reasons: cost, support model, complications. So we didn't go that route, so we kind of stuck with it. So what we did was we looked at the selection process for AWS and JD Edwards and with all of these other cloud providers. So cost was obviously a very big factor for us. So was, scalability. How do we upscale, downscale? How do we, when we go and acquire a new company and integrate them, how easy is it? Sort of thing. Performance, are we going to get better performance out of the application on AWS? Are we going to be able to scale these things up and still maintain the level of performance that we need across the globe? Disaster recovery, very, very critical when you're in a global environment trying to support thousands of users. Got to have a very, very solid disaster recovery plan. We felt that there was a good, solid platform here. Data movement. When you go to a cloud provider and you're a global company, data's going to move all over the place. It's going to move around the globe, quite often without you even planning it or knowing it, because other partners are going to come up. They're going to create their own integrations. They're going to stand up new applications. They're going to reach in and grab the data, and you may not even know it. So the point is, data migration and data movement was important to us. Also, strategic roadmap. As I mentioned earlier, Bobby George committed us to AWS. So there are support models, cost implications, and things that come with that. So we evaluated all of those, okay? And then what happened was, we started out and we said, okay, Oracle may be the most logical choice, but let's consider all these factors. So we go out, we do our investigation, and we kind of sit down, we assimilate all this information, we crunch it around in our head, and we sort of say, okay, which way are we going, what are we doing? Then ultimately, we come up with a solution based on an algorithm of those factors: cost, scalability, etc. So I'm going to stand here right now and say I'm a convert, because my personal option and my personal preference when we started this was to go OCI. But over the course of this analysis and over the course of evaluating these algorithms and these factors, I actually came around to the fact and believed that I'm now a convert, and I do believe AWS is a very viable and probably the best solution for JD Edwards going forward if you want to move to the cloud. Okay? Very, very long journey we took through this evaluation. Took us probably a good 8 months to evaluate all the vendors, to evaluate all the criteria, sit down, crunch, go back. Why are you more expensive? Why can't you meet this cost criteria? You're a strategic partner, so on and so forth. So it was a very, very thorough, very, very intricate process. And at the end, I believe we got it right by picking AWS. So, what was the project? Okay. It was a multi-million-dollar project, and I'll go into some more details in a minute, across the globe to move our JD Edwards from an on-premise situation to the cloud. For various reasons, contractual, lease commitments, etc., it was a very time-constrained project. So we had to do this in 10 months. And you'll see the scale of what we did, and I'll come to that in a few minutes. Anybody that's got JD Edwards probably has a number of integrated partner applications as well. Reports Now, DSI, Bottom Line Technologies for Formscape, whatever it may be. So all of those partners have to be online as well. We found the majority did have a solution that allowed us to move to the cloud. We found some that didn't. We found some that we had to find a replacement for. We found some that Oracle no longer supported, and we had to negotiate with them to get the level of support, etc. So it was a very, very critical timeline. We had to, as I said earlier, make sure that whatever we're doing aligns with the carrier ERP, COE strategic initiatives and solutions so that we're not kind of going off at a tangent and everyone else is kind of rowing upstream. Big issue for a company like Carrier is technical debt. We've got servers, we've got apps, we've got things all over the globe. Some apps that are no longer supported by the vendor, some apps where the renewal is on a credit card that person's long left the company, we don't know where it is anymore, that kind of thing. So technical debt was very, very important to us. And we do, on the JD Edwards side, a very, very good job of trying to keep on top of that technical debt and keep JD Edwards code current. My directive from my bosses was we've got to reduce run costs. Got to get it down, we've got to get it to the point where, the company sees some benefits, we're leaner, we're able to deliver some, cost reduction and benefits to the businesses that are reliant on this application. Had to deliver increased performance and flexibility. If we acquire companies, how can we put them on? How can we take them off, etc. And, the user experience is critical because they will ultimately be the ones that defend the application. They're the ones that will support the application. They're the ones that will take it to the next level wherever you want to go. So here's our landscape. This is what we were looking at. So we have, in our terminology, 6 instances of JD Edwards, okay, that we encompass within the scope of this project. 2 of those instances are in the Americas, 3 are in Europe, 1 is in APAC, in Asia. So what we did was, we looked at all of these. So within these 6 instances, as you dig deeper into the pyramid and into the detail, you'll find that, it's significantly more data sets, environments, business users, entities, etc. But the way we kind of have this set up in Carrier is that there are these 6 and they're kind of regionally and group-based. So as I mentioned earlier, HVAC, refrigeration, fire and security. So, these groupings tend to move along those lines. The TA EMEA and the TR North America are Transicold. The Spain is HVAC. APAC is primarily fire and security, and the Europe and the Americas is primarily fire and security. So we've kind of tried to align it with region and with business group of Carrier, so that we've got an easy silo that we can move. Okay. So here's some facts and figures about the scope of the project. So we moved from IBM to AWS. 6 instances of JD Edwards, that's 16 data environments, and more than 50 business units were involved in this project. We went through 4 test phases for each of these instances. So we went from unit testing, ICRP, SIT testing, conference room pilot testing, and UAT testing. Over 3,000 test scenarios were completed as we went through this journey from end-to-end process of all of the, various manufacturing, distribution, financial processes that our business units use and work through. Over 500 interfaces and integrations were, I don't know whether you would say migrated, unplugged, replugged, reconnected. This was the biggest single challenge that we had on this project, going from on-prem to cloud. Every piece of information going into or out of JD Edwards that wasn't through the kind of manual screen, we had to check, we had to track, we had to make sure that Those that were developed 15 years ago and the person that developed it is long gone and there's no tribal knowledge, we had to hunt them down and find them, dig them out, document them, test them, and try them. And that was a very, very big part of the project. Okay? More than 10 integrated products. So as I mentioned, Reports Now, Hubble, DSI, RF Smart. Those names, anybody here that's JD Edwards will recognize those. So we had to move 10 of those as well. As I say, one didn't move. We had to go and get a new supplier and find a new solution. We did that, and there were some challenges, but we got through it. We had a dedicated team of 20 people between my COE team, the LTI team, and the AWS team. Okay? The whole team, developers, subject matter experts, consultants for finance, manufacturing, distribution, was more than over 80 people were part of this overall team. And we moved over 2,000 business users, probably nearer 3, from on-prem to the cloud, totally seamlessly. They didn't even know we'd done it. They logged out on a Friday, they logged in on a Monday, everything looked exactly the same. They didn't have a clue. They didn't notice the difference, and that is the #1 success factor for me. We did 4 data migrations, 4 mocks for every instances we did this. So, we did a trial, then we did one to do one of the testing, then we did one for the ICRP SIT, one for UAT. So every single one, and of course a final one when we did the cutover. So, we absolutely were able to verify the accuracy, the time, and the scale. And I'll come to another good bit, a surprising piece of information on that. And as I say, we went from IBM DB2 on-prem database to Microsoft SQL Enterprise Edition. So, the I-series that we ran on, very big, couple of LPARs, one for production, one for test, one for disaster recovery. We took those and we moved them out into 6 cloud instances, as I said. So Asia Pacific, transit cold, so carrier refrigeration for EMEA, carrier Europe for fire and security Americas, carrier refrigeration for Americas, and Iberica Spain for HVAC. So we migrated those from DB2 to these 6 individual instances of AWS running on Amazon EC2 servers with Microsoft SQL Edition databases. Okay, so this was kind of like the approach that we took. So we had these IBM hardware, we had these instances. So what we did was we used compression tools to take the data off of the I-series, move it onto a SQL Enterprise Edition database, and compress it. We then moved that across our network out to AWS. So we moved 132, nearly 133 terabytes of data across those 6 instances, across our network, from on-prem, across the carrier network, onto the AWS cloud. And we did that achieving an 80% data compression rate. Okay? So where previously we were thinking we would need snow cones, snowballs, all sorts of other facilities to move that volume of data, when we actually shoved it through Microsoft Enterprise Edition, whoops, sorry folks, it's got a mind of its own. Okay, so when we compressed it through our SQL Enterprise Edition, then we moved it across to the cloud, compressed it again, we got over an 80% compression rate. That was staggering. We were not expecting that. But the benefit of that was, guess what? We could move it all across the network. We didn't need anything else. Really, really helpful. Okay, let's see if this thing's going to play. All right, so this was kind of like, stop. Sorry. Okay, so as we looked at this, these were the kind of steps we took through the process for each of these projects and the various stages and phases that we went through. Again, I'm just showing you that so it kind of gives you some idea of a timeline for each of these instances and the kind of steps that each one of them went through. And we overlapped this. We ran these in parallel. So we started back in March of 2022, and the smaller APAC instance went live in September 2022. One of the bigger ones in Europe went live in October. 2 more went live in November. 2 in October, 2 more in November, and now the next one, the very last one, is going to go this coming weekend. So, you know, we went through a tremendous amount of planning, validation, and mapped this out and said, this is roughly what we're looking at. Okay, key aspects of the technical solution. I'm going to hand you over to Jeremy for our technical expertise. Thanks, Jeremy.
No problem. So now I get to bore everybody with the technical details of it. I get to talk techie. So we did it with SQL Server on EC2. So JD Edwards, for those of you who have worked with it much, does not necessarily have a typical OLTP pattern. Because it keeps all of the business logic in the application tier and those UBEs and those business functions, only very basic DML actually go to the database. As a result of that, we are very light on CPU usage, but we are very heavy on I/O. It's all about getting the right I/O mix for a JD Edwards database. So what that means is we want a lot of memory to buffer those transactions coming in so that we don't ever have to go to disk to get them, because every one of those disk IOs adds latency to those transactions. When we do go to disk, we want to go fast. So, but we're not necessarily worried about latency at that point. It's more about IOPS because our memory is helping us mitigate the impacts of the latency. If we have chatty processes like JD Edwards MRP, the manufacturing process, it cares about the latency on the write. And no amount of memory helps you with write latency. So the solution for that is you do need low latency storage for your LDF file on your SQL Server to handle those chatty write transactions. We also used SQL Server page compression. So that reduced our footprint on disk between 70 and 80%. When we did backups, it got even smaller than that. So when you turn on SQL Server page compression, you get the benefits of both the reduced capacity on disk. You also get the advantage of each I/O will actually return more data every time it does a read from disk. And because it stays compressed in memory, your buffer cache is more effective, so you actually push even fewer IOPS to disk. So we did all of that on a SQL Server running on an X2 IEDN instance type. For those of you who aren't familiar, that provides 32 gig of memory per vCPU or 64 gig of memory per core, along with a very fast I/O backend. With SQL Server running JD Edwards, you want to turn on a feature called RCSI, Read Committed Snapshot Isolation, and that helps you with the blocking behavior of the database. The side effect of that is it creates a high load on your TempDB database because it writes a lot of snapshots to TempDB. But those are non-permanent transactions that are written to TempDB. It does not need to be on durable storage. So the X2 IEDN, again, is an ideal instance type for that because it has instant storage, which provides very fast performance with very low latency for that TempDB database. We also used AWS Database Migration Service. There was an existing solution in place with the iSeries to replicate data from the iSeries into a SQL Server database for data warehousing purposes. When we moved to AWS, we moved that from that third-party solution over to AWS DMS. Then for the application tier, we leveraged our burstable instances. So if you look at a JD Edwards workload, they tend to be very bursty. You'll see big spikes. They'll run for a period of time, taking every bit of resources that are available, and then they go down to nothing for long periods of time. That maps very nicely with our burstable instances. So we used the Intel T3 based instances for our batch servers. JD Edwards UBEs tend to have a single threaded behavior, which means they bind up on clock speed of the server. So you want to put those UBEs on the faster clock speed, which the T3s give us that faster clock speed compared to the compared to the AMDs. For WebLogic, we have challenges around garbage collection with JD Edwards. So our scaling is all about how we're doing that memory management, which makes AMDs a great solution for that. So we put all of our WebLogic servers running on T3As, again, burstable instances. So as Rick mentioned, with a project of this scale, there are always bumps in the road. So from a technical perspective, here are some of the bumps that we encountered along the way. One of them was a JDE MRP performance challenge. So as part of that, we moved the LDF files on the SQL Server from GP3 storage to IO2 storage, IO2 Block Express, and we saw about a 70% runtime improvement on that one process. Most of the other processes were unaffected by that move, but that MRP process, the runtimes dropped 70% by moving it to IO2 Block Express. We had a challenge with AWS DMS interacting with SQL Server always-on replication. We found it was a known bug. We rolled back to a prior point release and were able to resolve that issue. We had a challenge moving from the iSeries to SQL Server around character sets and case sensitivity. So for the character set that we selected on the SQL Server, it behaved differently with regard to the metadata case sensitivity than it did on the AS400. That required us to go back and work with some of the application vendors to actually change some of the hard-coded case they put into some of their database queries. And the final point that I'll call out that we ran into was just some challenges around Julian date formats, kind of some of the typical stuff with JD Edwards and the proprietary way that it manages, dates and some other data types. So back to Rick.
Thanks, Jeremy. So those challenges that Jeremy's outlined, you encounter them as you're going through. Particularly, I want to come back to one point Jeremy made here about the JD Edwards attributes. As long as I've worked with JD Edwards, never done this move from on-prem to cloud. And what we found was that when we natively went back and installed JD Edwards from scratch on Enterprise Edition, okay, what it does is it redefines the attributes of some of the control definitions within your tables. So what was an integer may become a numeric. What was a graphic may become a varchar, whatever. And some clever coders have taken advantage of that when it was on-prem, and then we move it to the cloud, and then lo and behold, they can't understand why this thing breaks. So that was a totally unforeseen issue, but with clever people, we were able to work around that, and we were able to straighten that out pretty quickly. But it was an unseen thing that we didn't kind of see coming our way. But, with everybody's help, we got it done. So, the reality, project of this scale doesn't always go 100% seamlessly. So here's some of the things that that I'm personally going to share with you in terms of what we found. And, some of these, just if anybody's going to go down this road, give you a little bit of an idea about what we're thinking. So, effective and frequent communication is absolutely essential to these kind of projects. We operate on a globe, chasing the sun, manufacturing, distribution, finance, whatever. The number of times people came to me and said, but we didn't know about this project. But, we've communicated this, we have a steering committee set up, we've got regional and instance teams all working through this. It's very difficult to make sure that in a 50, 60,000 person company that you get the information to all the right people. But it's important that you try. I think we did a pretty good job, but again, communication plan is really critical. We had, one of my challenges at the beginning was, I don't want meetings for meeting's sake. But when you're dealing with this kind of scale, this kind of volume, it's important that you get the right people bought into the process. And it isn't just the end users, it's all those other partner products, parallel projects that are going on, etc. Cross-functional team involvement is important. As I say, when you've got BI publisher teams, you've got data warehouse teams, you've got infrastructure teams, you've got all these other teams that you have to deal with that have to play in your game. It's important that you set up those cross-functional team involvements and you get them bought in. Nothing is ever done in isolation. As you're going through this, many other projects are also going on. Other projects that need data from JD Edwards or want to put data into JD Edwards. So working with those teams and understanding and coordinating all the go-lives is a challenge that you need to be aware of. Culture, language, and localization. We put APAC in first. Nobody in APAC speaks English. No one in America speaks Chinese. We have, fortunately, over a period of time, managed to kind of work out some kind of Esperanto type commonality language, and we were able to get through it. But it was still a challenge when APAC had issues, trying to get them to explain it in the level of detail that we needed, and things was difficult. So show me a screen print, show me a report, show me something, but culture, language is important. Some people, not my responsibility, so need to bear those in mind. OCM, when you're dealing with this and you're changing or everything, around your JD Edwards platform, OCM is critical. Making sure that people understand that it's not going to do them out of a job, that it is going to give them new tools that they can use to improve their day-to-day activity. They don't have to come running to one of my guys and say, hey, can I have a report? Or can I get this? Go to reports now, run it yourself. Go to the data lake, get a Power BI report. So, if you want to do a search within JD Edwards, now you can. Click here, search, find it all. Cafe One, pull up all these different screens that are all interrelated and show them all at once. So, definitely, OCM is a big part of it. We also found that there was a very big benefit for us in terms of lessons learned from previous AWS migrations. In 2021, and I'll go into it a little bit more, we did our first on-premise move to AWS Cloud in Europe, and it didn't necessarily go well. We had people that thought they knew what they needed on AWS. We had people that thought they could build a utopian solution with disaster recovery, hot rollover, and all this sort of thing. And, the lessons we learned from that helped us understand what we were going to face as we went through this. Approval processes. I don't know how many of you here work in a kind of size of company of carrier and understand the bureaucratic challenges of, I want to spend $50,000. Well, you've got to go to Fred, and you got to, and Fred's, and anybody Fred, sorry. I got to get approval, you know. Then Fred says, well, that now has got to go to Dave, you know, and then we've got to go in front of the digital procurement team. Then we've got to go and put it in Ariba, you know. So approval processes are not always real time, and if you're on a tight time frame, you need to have these pretty well planned ahead so that you know how to navigate these challenges. Executive support. Very critical. When you hit the guy that says, we can't do that, or our project is more important than yours, comes to who's the deal breaker. Executive support is crucial. My boss is a guy called Kishore Peruri, okay, who heads the whole of the ERP COE. I've not had to go to him more than 2 or 3 times, but when I have, he's taken on that responsibility. He's gone and he's helped me resolve the situation. So get executive sponsorship is critical. The data attributes that we spoke about just now hit us from left field. Didn't think about it, didn't see it coming. Other critical business processes broke. We can't get this report out. We can't get these orders into this customer portal because some very, very clever programmers were also looking at the attributes of the individual elements in the tables and saying, oh, this is numeric, so therefore I can do this. Well, when it changed, it kind of blew their applications a little bit. So, you know, that was a thing that we really didn't understand. Then we had hundreds of interfaces moving data in and out of JD Edwards, and every single one of those had to be repointed. Not just the big ones that everybody knows about. You know, yeah, we take this data and we shove it across into S4HANA. We take this data and we put it in the data lake. It's we've got this interface to the bank where we send them payments every month or every week. Oh, we've got this report that somebody pulls out and puts into Excel and has some macros and creates a CSV and shoves it out somewhere. And then, lo and behold, we move to the cloud. They don't get the data they wanted. The whole thing breaks. So we had, as I said earlier, a very big challenge in this area because, you know, being a 100-year startup and being on JD Edwards for more years than I was around in Carrier, they had interfaces that no one knew anything about, you know? Well, I don't know how this works. I just hit this button and it works. So we had to go through scheduler jobs. We had to go through job logs. We had to go through tribal knowledge. We had to pull all of this together, assimilate it, sort it, and I'm fortunate enough to say we did a pretty good job. So, you know, we knew this was going to be a challenge, so we put a lot of focus on this one. Okay, some lessons learned. So as I mentioned, back in 2021, we moved the first JD Edwards on-prem to on-cloud project. It was going from 8.12 JDE to 9.2 on the AWS cloud. The original infrastructure design possibly was not optimal. So we learned some lessons from that in that somebody said, oh yeah, we're going to AWS, so we need all of this and we need all of that, and AWS is cheaper, so we can go and get these big bang servers and we can go get all of this stuff. And we didn't necessarily involve AWS in that process, and we didn't necessarily collaborate across Carrier correctively. So, maybe not optimal. What then happened was the performance didn't match expectations. Everyone was expecting things to go lightning fast on AWS, and it didn't. It slowed down, and an example is the MRP process that Jeremy mentioned. We found that in one instance it was taking 30 minutes. These guys moved it to AWS. It took 2 hours. So we had to move, so we had to quickly work out how we're going to do that, what we're going to do. Costs way exceeded the budget because they kind of over-engineered this and went for way more than they actually felt they needed, because it was like, oh goody, open the candy box and we can have everything. Well, it comes with a cost. So we kind of went over budget. So this was the first time we'd moved Carrier on-prem to AWS. We probably overreached on the infrastructure, and there were probably too many well-intentioned architects in the room. We've got to do this, we've got to do this, we've got to do this. So, you know, we learned the lessons from that, and, you know, we kind of worked differently. So, when we realized that this wasn't working as well as we should, having partnered with AWS on our project, Jeremy and the AWS team completed a detailed analysis of that. You know, JDE was an SAP infrastructure. They right-sized the design and services, and they came back and reduced the costs. They reduced the costs. They came back and said, you can save here. Not, oh, goody, we've got a lot of money here that they don't, you know, they're over-engineered. No, they came back and quite honestly said, you're way over-engineered here. You can save your costs, bring this down, do a better job. So, final comment I'd like to make is, last but not least, the critical success of this project was based on the fact that you need to select experienced, capable, qualified, teams to support you. From the application teams, the infrastructure teams, AWS team, getting those right partners into your project carries a cost, but it carries success. Okay, it improves your chances of success substantially. Okay, get the partners involved early. Don't leave it till you've got a problem to bring them in. Get them involved early, help them, let them help you with the design, let them help you with the strategy and the tasks. And make sure that they're vested in your success. You know, they are a partner, they are there for you to, rely on, to help, and, let them help you and really continue to drive. So, in summary, we did, I think, a reasonable job to move 6 instances, 16 data, sets, 50 plus companies, 2,000 users, over from an on-prem that was costing us twice as much as we're going to be paying on AWS. We did it in 10 months. I think that was pretty reasonable. And we learned a lot of lessons along the way. There'll be another project that we do next year. But overall, I think moving JDE to the cloud, to AWS, should not be scary, should not be a major concern. It shouldn't be something that you dismiss without fully analyzing. We went through a very, very thorough process. There was not, I will tell you this, there was not a lot of difference between OCI and AWS, but what AWS did was they became vested in the process, and they really partnered up with us and helped us tremendously. So, thank you, Jeremy, the AWS team that helped us, Megan Rye, Chris Marsh, Bhuvan, who's here somewhere, okay. Thank you for your partnership, thank you for your input, thanks for the support.